We're waiting for the court decision. This has to do with Trump's travel halt. It could be out any moment. Remember, the Washington court, the lower court, put a temporary restraining order on it. Then the Trump administration appealed that and went to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Now we're hearing from Peter Barnes, who could come out in about an hour and a half. We also have new polls showing a majority of people supporting President Trump's refugee halt in both the United States and Europe. The polls also show Trump's travel ban and sanctuary city policies among the most popular executive orders. All of his executive orders have more support than disapproval in the United States. And on top of that, look at this number. 55% of people in 10 European countries, they support the travel halt as well. So here's the question. If a majority of people support this move by the Trump administration, why all the protests? Well, my next guest says, we're letting the loudest voices in the room control the narrative. Look who's here. The wife of American sniper, Taya Kyle, joins me now. So this is your line. We're letting the loudest voices in the room control the narrative. What do you mean?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the problem is that when people aren't educated, and a lot of times we find if you're asking some of the protesters why they're there, what's the policy decision, what are they upset about, we hear things that just aren't true. So, for example, if they're saying this is a Muslim ban, it's not a Muslim ban. There are, what, 50 to 60 countries that are majority Muslim? No, this is a travel ban on 7 countries that both President Obama and President Trump have gotten information that these are a higher probability of getting terrorism out of those countries into ours. So we have an obligation to look at those. I mean, the government's primary job is to protect its people. We don't just say, oh, there's an Ebola outbreak, let everybody in, we'll sort it out when we get here. So it's the same thing with terrorism. You don't just say, oh, bring everybody in because it feels good to do that, and we'll sort it out when you get here. That's not the way this works.
You know, we interviewed your husband, Chris Kyle's Iraqi interpreter the other night, and he also defended the president's travel ban. Let's take a listen. I'd like your reaction.
He just like, I want to protect my country no matter how much it's going to take me. This is give us more safe environment for our family, for our kids, our wives, our parents. And I think everyone loves the United States should support Trump.
So why aren't voices like his and why aren't voices like yours? It seems, why aren't they being heard? It seems like the protests are drowning out everything.
Yeah, you know what, that's a good question. I think sometimes fear is a powerful motivator, and I think that the narrative was created that everybody should beware of Trump, that he's going to be, you know, the next Hitler or whatever they were saying, and I think that it's frightening for them to have such a strong stance and come back and say, wait, you know what, maybe he's not that bad. Maybe he's actually doing and following some of the information that I think Obama started to develop with those 7 countries in particular. And that's not as exciting. You know, you're not going to protest that. And it requires them to stand back a little bit and be analytical and study, why is this a problem? I mean, when you really dig into this issue of letting refugees come in from those areas, it's very complex. I talked to some friends of mine who have been in the Middle East dealing with this on the border of Syria and Jordan and looking at the refugee camps that, by the way, Jordan is not letting the refugees in, and they're right next door, and they're one of our biggest allies. So, you know, when you dig into why, what's the vetting process like, it's very complex. It's not so easy, and it's not that people are truthful either. It's not like we can just ask these questions and get a truthful answer and move forward. It ends up being very complex, which is difficult when you have a big heart. I have a big heart. I'd love to bring everybody in. But once I start digging in, I think, you know what, it's just not that simple.
Yeah, you make a good point because, you know, we are a welcoming nation, right? And we want to bring in refugees, and we have been routinely. The U.S. has been so criticized, though, and you make a good point. The Mideast countries are not taking them in, right?
No, they're not. And by the way, if they really have a problem and they're a refugee and they need help, we are not the only country that can help. I think Canada, Trudeau said, bring anybody in, we'll take all the refugees. So I think we need to release ourselves from this guilt of somebody dies if they don't come to America. And I also think we need to look at it like this is our home and we need to protect it. I would love to open my personal home up to anybody in need, take care of everyone, come in, I won't ask any questions, but I have children to protect. I have to protect myself so that I can provide for my children, right? I have to at least find out who these people are, make sure that they're not liars and evildoers. It's the same with our country.
You know, your husband died for our country, and you do such great service for our country. What did your husband say about the values of these jihadis?
So it's different, right? I mean, and I appreciate you saying the jihadis instead of Muslims, because it's not Muslims that we're talking about, right? We're talking about terrorists. And when you talk about the savage behavior that they do, I mean, throwing homosexuals off rooftops is really common. And people don't talk about that. That's a big deal. Knocking the teeth out of little boys so you can sodomize them and then burning their eyes with cigarettes so that they can't be identified. That's savage behavior, right? These are terrorists. So what Chris often said is that people don't understand what it's like in some of these areas in the Middle East. Not all of them, but some of these areas. And they also don't understand that truthfulness, record keeping, they don't do birth certificates, they don't do death certificates, they're not keeping track of their citizens like we are. So it creates a very complex issue, because how do you identify who has evil in their heart? It's
That's
not
right.
that simple. And how do you identify somebody who's lying to you?
That's such a great point. And also that, just a small footnote, ISIS has been running factories for phony passports, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right. I mean, there was a shooting at Al-Jafar, too. I think it was a Jordanian who was a Christian guy. It's not a religious issue. It's a guy, and he executed 3 Green Berets, right, saying he was a Christian, a Jordanian, an ally. It's not that simple. We don't know who is the threat.
Taya Kyle, you are wonderful. Please come back soon. We love having you on the show. We honor you, and thank you so much for your husband's service and for yours as well. Thank you so much.